Good evening. Good to see a good group out tonight, and I hope you brought your thinking cap on. We're going to give you some information tonight that's going to hopefully answer some questions in your mind. If you will, turn to Revelation chapter 11. We're moving right along. Actually, some of you were surprised that we covered chapter 10 all in one night last time, right? Something new, right? Chapter 11, we're going to slow back down a little bit because we got to do some building here before we move on and bring some things together, things that we've been talking about for months now. You probably have been wondering, where do we get that from? Well, I'm going to qualify some of that tonight. So let's read chapter 11. Have you follow along? I want to read from verse 1 down to verse 14. Oh, here come two more. Let's wait on them real quick. Again, Revelation chapter 11, beginning of verse 1. This is, for those that are new tonight, this is the Apostle John. He's in glory getting the revelation of Jesus Christ, which is the future prophecy of where the world's headed, okay? And he's getting it in living technicolor and writing it down so you and I can have it 2,000 years later. So we read in chapter 11, verse 1, and there was given me, this is John again, the Apostle John, was given me a reed like a rod, and the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship in it. But the court which is outside the temple, leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the nations, and unto the holy city they shall tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands standing before God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, and where also our Lord was crucified. And they of the peoples and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not permit their dead bodies to be put in the graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3 days and a half of the Spirit of life from God, them, and great fear fell upon them that saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up here. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were terrified, and gave glory to God of heaven. And the second woe was past. Behold, the third woe comes. And we're in the middle here. Remember chapter 11, and you're going to also find out here chapter 12 is called parenthetical teaching. And again, what does parenthetical mean? It's a parenthesis. It's side of a side step. Oh, by the way, thing. When you write something in parentheses, you're accentuating a thought or an idea here. And we learned last time we were together. Of course, for those of you that are new, we're in the midst of the 7 trumpets. Boy, I've got several new ones tonight, so bear with me, everybody. Let me make a quick run back. of the 144,000 Jews is going to be the message of the kingdom. Behold, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's what John the Baptist preached when he was preaching prior to Christ's coming and when Christ first came. He was preaching, behold, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Here's Messiah. He fully believed that Jesus was going to set up the kingdom, and that's what he preached. Well, guess what? When he comes back this time, he's setting up his kingdom. And I believe these 144,000 Jews are going to know about when it's happening because they know they're on a 7-year time frame. Because we know, based on what we're going to study tonight, the 70th week of Daniel is what we're fulfilling here. We're in a 7-year period. So the idea is that these 144,000 witnesses are witnessing for Christ, primarily to the Jews, and all of a sudden comes on the scene these two guys. And we just read, we'll get into it next week. Okay, you're going to have to come next time. You have to come back more about these guys. But the first question about who these witnesses is, who are they? And there's lots of debate in Christianity about who they are. Moses, Elijah, who knows? Two guys, we don't know who they are. There's no telling. We're going to talk about more of that next time we're together. But that's usually the first thing you run into when you mention these two witnesses is people want to debate who they are. Well, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't really matter to me who they are. Okay? I don't mind the debate, and we can talk about the Old Testament and whatever happened to people in the past, okay? But the reality is these two guys are coming on the scene. They're going to be supernaturally empowered. They can devour people. They have much of the same gifts, if you will, or the power, God's power, if you will, to do the plagues that Moses did to Egypt. They can bring fire from heaven. They can bring frogs. They can turn water into blood. They're going to be able to do all this stuff. Okay? These guys aren't going to be anything to mess with. Now, at the same time, they're witnessing for Christ. We've read on several occasions already, and we're going to continue to see this throughout, God's saving people during the tribulation period. Now, I believe the majority of them are going to be Jews. But there's also, in several places, it says, of all nations. So there's going to be Gentiles getting saved as well. Okay? But when these guys start witnessing, it's going to get people's attention. And they're going to take note. Now, it's going to do one of two things. They're going to hate their guts, or they're going to get saved. There's not going to be anything in between. Because when these guys start consuming people with their mouths, fire breathing out of their mouths and this kind of stuff, it's going to make people mad. Or they're going to fall in fear of them and get saved. So it's going to really make people make a decision. And that's how I see their ministry. Now, their ministry, we learn, lasts for 3.5 years. And then they're martyred. So we'll talk more about that next time we're together. But their ministry lasts for 3.5 years. I believe it's going to last through the first 3.5 year period. I believe these guys come on the scene real soon. The minute the tribulation starts, these guys come on the scene probably about the same time the 144,000 witnesses. These guys may be the leaders, if you will, or the guides, if you will, of the 144,000. These may be the teachers of the 144,000. But these guys are going to have supernatural power that the 144,000 don't. These guys are special. You see them here where they're martyred and they're resurrected from the dead, and we'll talk more about that next time. We'll get into the two witnesses. That was just to get you back. We see here that in chapter 11, verse 1, John's given a reed to measure the temple. It says, and there was given me a reed like a rod, and the angel stood saying, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and them that worship in it. But the court which is outside the temple leave out. Measure it not, for it is given unto the nations, and the holy city shall tread underfoot 42 months. And one thing you see right out front several times in Revelation, you see where John actually gets involved in what's going on. Here he's supposed to measure out the temple, use the reed and measure the temple. We saw him at one point where God called him up to heaven. Hey, John, come on up. And he got in the middle of the throne room and the worship and all that stuff. We saw him eat the scroll in chapter 10, where he ate the bittersweet scroll. So we see John actively involved in his own prophecy that he's writing. Now, what's the symbolic of that? I don't know. But here, John is the one literally making the testimony testimony, if you will, to you and I thousands of years later about this measuring of the temple. The question is, what's it about? Why are we measuring the temple? Well, first of all, it's the idea that if you're going to foreclose on a piece of property, you want to know what you're foreclosing on. We do appraisals, we do surveys, we do title searches, we do all kinds of things, so we know what we're foreclosing on, right? Well, that's kind of how I see this right here. Christ is foreclosing on the title deed of the earth. What's he foreclosing on? Is he foreclosing on the whole earth? Not according to this. What's he foreclosing on? He's foreclosing on the temple. Not even the whole temple. He's not foreclosing on the Gentile court, the outer court. He's foreclosing on that part of the temple that was Jewish. You know, one of the things that we have going on today is the world kind of thinks, a lot of Christians think that God's done with the Jews. He's not. The book of Revelation is all about the Jews. God is rapturing us, the glory as Gentiles, mainly Gentiles, and then he's going to turn his attention back on the Jews, which were his chosen people. And back in Malachi and back in the Old Testament, he gave them a writ of divorcement. I'm done with you guys. I'm sick of your bringing lambs with broken legs and all this kind of stuff, and you're robbing me. I'm done with you. Idol worship, I'm sick of you. And he gave him a writ of divorcement. He turned his attention to Gentiles. And for the last 2,000 years, he's been reaching primarily Gentiles. But in the Revelation, he's going to turn back around, and all those Old Testament prophecies about the Davidic kingdom and Jesus sitting on the throne of David and all this kind of stuff are all going to come to pass. And he's going to bring it about. And we see it right here where he measures strictly the temple, the Jewish part of the temple, the Holy of Holies, and the outer court or the inner court where the Jews were allowed and Gentiles weren't allowed to go. And that's what he's measuring here. Okay? And so you say, okay, well, what is that about? Well, there's a lot of symbolism here. One thing you learn about Revelation, God uses a lot of symbolism. This is where people get confused. If you don't really take a lot of time and study it, you'll never get any of the symbolism. Even when you study it for years like I have, there's still a lot of things you don't understand. And you just have to let it be because you don't understand it. You know, someday we'll see it. But right now, this is one I think we pretty well can understand. John measures the place of the remnant of Israel. Now, the reed was something that was used often in the Old Testament. Most of them were taken out of the Nile Valley, and they ranged anywhere from 15 to 20 feet long. And they were rigid, so you could, like a yardstick, you could hold them out, and at a 20-footer, you know, you could do how many of those that you want to, how many reeds long it was. And they had standards that they used, but John here is given the reed to measure, okay? God is not repossessing the Gentiles. The Gentiles have had their day. Free grace. Salvation is free. Trust in Christ and thou shalt be saved. Right? We've had our 2,000 years plus to get saved. He's raptured us, primarily Jews. The Church of Jesus Christ is still, even today, is primarily Gentiles. I'm sorry, not Jews, but Gentiles. Okay? And he's going to rapture us. Then he's going to turn his attention back to the Jews. And so he's telling us here when John is measuring out to foreclose on this title deed, John, that's what I'm focused on. That's the deal. Now, you can go back to the Old Testament as far back as Genesis chapter 24, I think, or 25, where Abraham went and sacrificed Isaac on Mount Moriah. That's Temple Mount. Later on, David bought it. The threshing floor, and David bought it. That's Temple Mount. When Solomon built the first Jewish temple, it was on Temple Mount, Mount Moriah. When it was rebuilt under King Herod, it was on Temple Mount. When it's rebuilt soon, I think, okay, it's going to be on Temple Mount, Mount Moriah, right next to the Dome of the Rock, or they're going to bulldoze the Dome of the Rock. I'm not sure which, but one or the other is coming. The temple's going to be rebuilt on Mount Moriah, okay? And so, with all of that said, that's what God is concerned about. That's his mountain. That's where his Shekinah glory dwelt when he was in the presence of Israel, in their nation. he dwelt in that Shekinah glory, dwelt in the Holy of Holies on that particular, it's about, I guess with the outer court, it's like probably 60 feet by 60 feet. It's not much, probably not as big as this church. The Holy of Holies was a little tiny place. It wasn't much bigger than a big closet. Okay? But that's what he's foreclosing on. And he has John measure it out. And he says, leave out the outer court. Gentiles are going to tread that down. They're going to tread down the nation. Okay? They're going to tread down Jerusalem. But the reality, as a matter of fact, that actually happened in 70 AD where they destroyed Jerusalem. You're going to make a comment? Oh, absolutely. Oh, trust me, I've been listening real close to what's going on in Europe right now. We are seeing a revival of Zionist hatred in Europe. Same thing that the Nazis did back during World War II is happening all over Europe today. Particularly the Islamics are taking over Europe. There's still a sense of Nazism and white superiority. They all are fearing the Zionists. There was a deal just on WRMB yesterday I was listening to on the radio, a guy that is a Jewish Frenchman. And he deliberately put on a yarmulke and went out in the streets of Paris recently with a hidden camera. And just the fact he was walking around the streets of Paris with his yarmulke on, he's being cursed out, he's being spit on, called a Zionist pig, and all kinds of stuff, and he got it all on camera. And he's making a documentary out of it. Now, what was ironic is he was being interviewed, they played some of the interview, but he was being interviewed by a French journalist. And she's basically saying, well, weren't you enticing it? And he said, yeah, I walked out my front door with a yarmulke on. And he's being persecuted as a Zionist. So, I mean, this is the kind of hatred that's going on right now in Europe. Satan's alive and well, and he's already turning the world against the Jews. And then, like you said just recently, the Jews in Israel are saying, come on home. You know, there's people in Ukraine, and the two areas are Ukraine and Europe, that they're begging the Jews to come to Israel. You know, and so I think we're going to see a massive migration of the Jews to Israel in these last days, and there's going to be the persecution will be heated up all over the world. Carol, big and loud for the camera.
I just wanted to take you back, if you want a more intricate discussion or direction as to the measuring the exact millennial temple. We have, I'm back in my old notes again, in Ezekiel, and it begins at chapter 40, verse 1, and it takes you through 42, chapter 42, verse 20.
It gets all into it.
And it goes very in-depth, the measuring of the temple, and it takes into the music rooms and each of the rooms of the temple, and it goes on through, and it measures it by the reed.
Correct.
So if in fact you want to
study. I had that in my notes and I'm skipping it for the sake of time, but she's right. Go back and study. If you want to know more about the measuring of the temple, go back and do it. It's good study. And the reality here, again, the thing you want to get out of tonight is God is eliminating everything except the Jewish part of that temple. The inner court was where the Jews went to hand their animals, their slain animals, to the priest, and then the priest went into the inner sanctum or the Holy of Holies to burn their sacrifice. The Gentiles could not go in there; they could only stay in the outer court. So the Gentiles were not allowed in the inner court. So what Christ has, or what God is having John measure, is the inner court and the inner sanctum and the altar. All that's Jewish, yes.
The actual physical temple?
Both. Now, we're going to get, in a minute, we'll get over to Daniel chapter 9, and you'll see a little more. I'll explain shortly. I don't want to get too much into it, but what's called the abomination of desolation. Okay? And we'll talk about that just briefly in Daniel chapter 9. That's when Satan sets himself up in that holy place to be worshipped as God. Okay? So that's what the focus is going to be. The focus from here on out is on that little piece of land on top of Mount Moriah with that temple sitting on it. That's the focus from now on. Okay? Because that's what Satan's after, And that's what Christ ain't going to let happen. Okay? So that's the whole point. That's what's being measured here. It's the center of everything is that little postage stamp on top of Mount Moriah. And what that tells you, and I'm going to say this in front of the camera, so whoever listens to it will hear it, okay? We have a lot of people in Christendom today that are worried about who's doing what and why politically, and who's funding what, and we got the truthers that are into the Rothschilds controlling everything and all this kind of stuff. And let me tell you something. God could care less who's doing what, okay? He could care less. He knows Satan's going to use his minions, whoever they are, to bring about God's plan anyhow. And he's given Satan somewhat of a free rein to bring about his one world system, and God doesn't really care how it's coming together, because ultimately it's going to fulfill God's plan when they all turn against Israel and God destroys them all and delivers his nation. So it doesn't really, don't focus a lot on all the political garbage and who's doing what and ISIL and all this other stuff. It doesn't really matter to us as Christians. Our job doesn't change. As I preached this morning, it's evangelize and make disciples. That's why we're here. And if they're lopping off our heads, well, oh well. You know, that's part of the game plan. It's going on all over the Middle East right now. We're just exempt kind of here in America. But it's only a matter of time, I believe, if God tarries, that it's coming here. Okay? And we just have to keep doing what God's called us to do. Our ministry doesn't really change. The politics may change, our stature in life may change, a lot of things may change from that standpoint, but our ministry doesn't change. And I really don't care politically who's in charge of what. I'm to the point I really don't care who gets elected president of the United States next. I don't care. It's not going to matter, to be honest with you. I don't really see a big revival taking place and reverting America back to its glory days. I just don't see that happening. I don't see it in prophecy, number one. Now, I love America, don't get me wrong. I've had a good ride, but in year 2015, where we are today, we've thrown God out now for about 60 years. I'm not sure he's interested in being here anymore, a whole lot more, to be honest with you. You know, and I just see our country going, like, I've been preaching this for 40 years, and I've seen America down, you know, just going like that, downhill for 40 years. And it's not getting any better. And I don't see anything coming on the horizon that's going to make it any better. I mean, unfortunately, Billy Graham's getting ready to, you know, he's going to go see Jesus soon. And he might have been our last hurrah, you know. But, huh? Oh,
It's adding nail after nail on our coffin.
as far as America's concerned, the stuff that's happening, if we survive the next 2.5 years, we're going to be lucky. I mean, you know, that's just what I see politically. But it doesn't matter worldwide what's going on. It doesn't really matter, is my point. So don't get caught up in all of that. Stay in the scriptures. We win. That's all that matters. We're on the winning side. We know the end of the book. All right? So we've got to take one day at a time and witness and share with who we can to try to get them saved before it's eternally too late. And you know, I've had all kinds of conversation the last several months about the Rothschilds and all this other junk going on, and I keep telling the guy, I don't care. I really don't care. I don't believe most of it to start with, but even if it was true, it doesn't matter. So they're being used of Satan. Oh well, who cares? What's this say? Well, God's measuring the temple because he's going to deliver the Israelites, the remnant of them. He's going to deliver them, and he's going to destroy everybody else. That's what the Bible teaches. John.
Purpose for a Christian is to live a Christian life and to evangelize.
Correct.
But if the government prevents you from evangelizing, that we should oppose.
Well, as long as we can, I agree. But if they got big enough guns, string me up. I mean,
The Christians do during Roman times to oppose.
Well,
They were hiding in the cave.
yeah, I mean, we can use common sense to a point, but the bottom line, you know, I heard by 3 people today. I haven't seen the video. I want to watch it. But the people that just lopped their heads off. And one of the things they were saying, if you've seen the video, none of them are crying. None of them are crying. They're getting their heads lopped off. They're not crying. They're not despairing. Why? They go to glory. They go to glory. I mean, if you go back and you study John House's life, and he's burning at the stake and praising Jesus while he's burning at the stake. So I mean, there's a point we've got to have that mentality when it gets to that point. It may not, we may never see it in our lifetime, but I'll be honest with you, the way I see things going, I'm going to be shocked if at least my grandkids don't see it. Okay? I mean, I'm a realist. I've studied world history quite a bit. There's never been a nation restored, with the exception of the city of Nineveh, from the type of debauchery that we're involved in. Never. Just the abortion issue. How many young people have we aborted in the last 60 years? 50-some million? Now same-sex marriage, and I mean, we're Sodom and Gomorrah. We're headed there, lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, again, I don't want to preach doom and gloom here, but the point I want to make is our ministry doesn't change as a church, as Christians. It doesn't change. It's evangelized till Jesus comes. And when he comes back, we're out of here. And I mean, that's kind of where we're at in the thing, okay? Now, again, I believe that there's two things being shown here with this measuring of the temple. The first is God's symbolic favor towards the people of Israel. That's his focus. Okay? He's given us a little glimpse here in the beginning of chapter 11 that my focus is on Israel. That part of that temple that pertains to them, that was their access to God, was that holy place. And bringing those animals and sacrificing that blood and killing those animals and quartering them and burning them on that altar so he had the sweet-smelling savor of those sacrifices. That's how they communicated with their God that they were repentant about their sins. And he's going to deliver that. That is going to stay in place. Okay? They're going to be all over. They're going to probably most of their ministry is going to be in Jerusalem. Yeah, I believe probably that's when they're killed in the streets. It's in Jerusalem, and when they resurrect from the dead, it's going to be in Jerusalem. I'm going to throw this out of. It's really part of next time study as well. But you know, when I started preaching this stuff 40 plus years ago, we had no concept of how this was going to happen because we didn't have satellite television. You know, when Humvees were being blown up every night in Baghdad, we were watching it live on television. So everything's in place today for this to take place and the whole world watch it. And the mark of the beast, so don't get ahead of that. But, you know, again, 40 years ago when I was teaching this stuff, we didn't have satellite television. We were at least 3 or 4 days before the newsreels could get from the Middle East to America to run on AP. You know, now it's instant. Watch it live broadcast, simulcast. We'll all have our computers on if we're still here watching it. I'm not planning on being here, so you can have my computer if you're here. Okay? Yeah. But the reality is, everything we read here today is possible to see it and watch it. So are we closer to what's happening? Yeah, as far as I'm concerned. We can really understand this stuff today where before you had to stretch a little bit. How's everybody going to see it? Well, now we know how they're going to see it. They're going to see it on their iPhones. Okay, when they're martyred, and they're going to see it on the iPhones when they resurrect from the dead. For 3 days, they're going to be watching the dead bodies laying in the streets. And everybody rejoicing about it. Notice it's Christmas time. They're so happy these guys are dead, they're going out and giving gifts to each other. It's going to be like Christmas. That's how happy these guys they are. They're going to be that these guys are dead. So, I mean, this is a big deal. But before we get there, the thing I really want to focus on is the symbolism of this temple shows God's interest still in Israel, because that's significant. The book of Revelation, really from chapter 6 on, is about Israel. And you got to know that, okay? The second thing is that it shows forth symbolically God's rejection and his coming wrath on the Gentiles and their rejection of him. He eliminates the outer court and the city. It's no longer of significance to him. And there are days coming. You know, what it really does, it just tells us that the Gentiles are done, pretty much. There's not going to be churches on every corner and pastors up preaching the gospel to the Gentiles. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be Gentiles saved, because there will be. But the emphasis is no longer, which it has been for 2,000 years plus, it's been the emphasis of the witness of God and the Holy Spirit has been on the Gentile. That's going to come to an end. Rapture's going to stop. Rapture's the last hurrah for Gentiles. Okay? And I believe that's why he eliminates, he doesn't measure the outer court, and he doesn't measure the city, because the nations are no longer important to him. He's focused on Israel. And that's the purpose of the measuring that I see there. That's who he's foreclosing on. He wants Israel back. He's taken Israel back, okay? So then we get to the two witnesses, and we're going to skip that. What I want to focus on here as we leave it is in verse 2. It talks about 40 and 2 months. And then you get down to verse 3, and it's 2,203 score days, which is 2,260 days. Both of those references are 3.5 years. So the ministry of these witnesses are for 3.5 years. You've heard me repeat over and over again, and I keep telling you we're going to get here. Well, we're here. I keep telling you, why a 7-year period? What's that all about? Well, turn to Daniel chapter 9. Now, keep in mind, Daniel chapter 9 was written 750 years before Christ ever came, which was roughly 2,000 plus years ago when Christ came. So we're talking, what, 2,800 years ago, we were told there's going to be a 7-year period that comes, this pure hell on earth. So this was prophesied 2,700 plus years ago in Daniel chapter 9. Start of verse 23. And the beginning of the supplications, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. So here the angel's given a vision to Daniel. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to finish the transgressions, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the Most High. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the Prince that shall come shall destroy the city in the sanctuary, and the end of it shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war of desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice of the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of the abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that the determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. And you say, boy, Pastor, what in the world is that all talking about, right? Well, the first thing you have to understand is we're talking about a calendar. Okay? 70 weeks are determined. Well, you know, that's a pretty short time, right? No, not really. Okay? We're talking about the Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar, like the civil calendar, is also based on the lunar astronomical phenomena. The rotation of the earth on its axis is a day. The rotation of the moon around the earth is a month. The rotation of the earth around the sun is a year. Now, the Hebrew calendar varies with the Roman calendar based on the law of the Sabbaths. The Roman calendar does not consider the Sabbaths, so we end up with our 365 days in a year, and every 4 years we got a leap year, and we have an extra day added in, and our months are somewhere between 28 days and 31 days, and that's the Roman calendar that we go by. Most of the world goes by that today, not the Jews. Their calendar is tied to the Sabbaths. The Sabbath is a 7-year period, a 7-day period, a 30-day month. There's 360 days in a Jewish year. Now, then they also add in, they have 7 years, the 6 years, if you study out the Sabbath as it relates to horticulture, 6 years they were to plant and harvest. The 7th year they would let the land lay fallow, and whatever grew, they harvested that. And that went on for 7 series of years, so 49 years. And then the 50th year, the 49th year was a fallow year, and so was the 50th year a fallow year, and they call that the Jubilee. And that's how they made up for the shortcomings of their calendar as it related to the 29 and a quarter days per month that the sun goes around the earth, or the moon goes around the earth, and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Correct. Correct. Which means next year might be the Jubilee. I mean, again, huh? Yeah. Or not. But, the deal is that the number 7 is critical here. Okay? And we're talking 70 years is determined. So 70 times 7 is what? 490 years. Okay? Now, how you get there is you get there by it all breaks it down into 3 score and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going to give you the numbers here, okay? Based on God's creation and design of the universe, day cycles are 24 hours per day. Monthly cycles are 29.5 day average per month. The Jews use 30 days. Their yearly cycles are 36 days per year. Sabbath cycles, 7 weeks of years, or 2,252 days. Harvest cycles 6. Now that's 3.5, so it's double that. Harvest cycles 6 weeks of every Sabbath cycle. Sabbath rest every 7th year and that's an F there. Every Sabbath cycle. And then the Jubilee rest is a year, the 7 weeks of years, 49 plus 1 year every 50th year. And that's basically how the Jewish sabbatical calendar breaks down. Now, so what we end up with as we study this, it talks about weeks. Really what it's referring to is weeks of years. Okay? So when you say 70 weeks, it's 70 weeks times 7 years. Okay? Now, the other issue that we're not sure of, it doesn't explain it here, somewhere in there in 70 weeks is a Sabbath, is a Jubilee. Maybe 2, depending on when you start counting it. Okay? Which means now you've got a Jubilee. That means you've got another 7-year period, maybe 14-year period added in a 70-year or 70-week period. Okay? So there's some speculation, and you can get into all kinds of people. There's set dates, blood moons, and all kinds of stuff, Doug. Okay? But we don't know the time or the hour. I believe we can know the seasons, but Jesus said nobody knows the time of the hour. So, yeah, not even Jesus. So I'm not gonna subjugate him and try to set dates here and be stupid enough and embarrass myself that he's coming next week, which some people have done. Okay? All I'm telling you is we're closer today than we were yesterday. Okay? Have already been done. With one exception, the temple's got to be rebuilt, or they can't have the desolation, the abomination of desolation in the temple. So, well, no, but the rapture can take place, but they got to get the temple built pretty quick if they do that. So I kind of think we might see the construction begin on the temple. I'll be honest with you, back when we had the first Iraq war and Saddam Hussein was shooting Scuds over, I was waiting for one of them to blow that Dome of the Rock off Temple Mount, and I'd go, yay, and I'd I'd have been on my knees waiting for Jesus to show up. So, but you know, again, they're debating right now how to build the temple with the Temple Mount with the Dome of the Rock still there. And no, I think it's pretty specific. He's going to desecrate the temple here. The abomination of desolations is when you go over to 2 Thessalonians, and he sets himself up to be worshipped as God in the Jewish temple. And so, no, it's a tabernacle. I think it probably would have changed the language there. Probably. I really believe we're going to see we're going to see the Jews. That's why Satan is going to give them a peace pact. The rest of the world is going to buy into Satan's program. We're not going to have a problem with it. We will, but the rest of the world's not going to have a problem with it. But the Jews are going to say, time out. We're not about to worship this guy.
But God does give the temple to Satan.
Well, he lets him take over, yeah. The last 3.5 years, he lets him do the abomination of desolation for 3.5 years. But the reality is, it's God's program, okay? And Satan's going back to when we looked at Isaiah 14, Satan wants to be God. He wants to rise himself up above God and be worshipped as God. And so the place to do that is in the Jewish temple. And that's where it's headed. And that's what we read about in 2 Thessalonians 2. The whole 10 yards is done. You're getting way ahead of me. You're giving too much away here, okay? Maybe you'll help him come back, you know. Yeah, he's going to fake a resurrection. And, you know, he's going to do all that stuff. But the thing I want you to understand, we get the 7 years of tribulation from this text. Because what you learn here, and I want to point this out here, Daniel chapter 9 talks about 490 Sabbath years. Now, look at what it says here. It says 70 weeks are determined. That word determines means they're in concrete. It's going to happen. Because God's the one that determined it. Okay, now here's the things that are going to happen. It's upon the people and the holy city. Now, notice what we saw back in Revelation. He's not measuring the city. It's going to be trodden down. It was already trodden down back in 70 AD once. It's going to be trodden down again. That means destroyed. Okay? Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. It's going to be trodden down of the Gentiles. So it's not about the people, and it's not about the holy city. What's determined is to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, if you study out all those things, what you really find, the first 69 years before Messiah, none of that was fulfilled. It was all fulfilled in the life, death, and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The 69th year. Okay? Actually, the 7th year of the 69th year. Okay? Because remember, the 69th year is a 7-year period. When he went to that cross on Calvary and he resurrected from the dead, he fulfilled all this stuff. He made the payment for sin. He made the deliverance for iniquity. I mean, right on down the line, he fulfilled it all on Calvary. Okay? But the reality is, 70 years were determined. Now, what does it say? He says, verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the King, or the Prince, shall be 7 weeks. Now, what you learn there, remember we've got 70 weeks to start with. Now he's breaking it down to 7 weeks, 62 weeks, which is 60 weeks of years. Okay? And 2 weeks. That's a total of 69 weeks of years. Okay? So there's a week missing. We're talking 70 weeks, right? We're at 69. Now, first thing you got to know here is the first 7 years, Nehemiah was rebuilding the temple and rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and reestablishing the city. So that's what it's talking about there. The street and will be built again in the wall and even in troublous times. That's the book of Nehemiah. Yes.
Is this the second rebuilding of the temple or the
This
one
was
that's
the
yet to
sec-
come?
this was the second one under Nehemiah. Correct. Became the Herodian temple. This one was, and what you study, and this you got to get a little historical here. Let me move back. Okay, I don't want to go there yet. Okay, first of all, here. Then after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Two things you need to learn here. The first thing is there's two princes. First being the Prince of Peace, Messiah. Okay, in verse 20, what is it, 25? Yeah, 25. The prince shall be 7 weeks, Messiah. Then we see the second prince in verse 26 after Messiah is cut off, but not for himself and the people of the prince that shall come to destroy the city. That's Satan himself. He's the prince of the power of the air, right? So we see both princes present here involved in this prophecy. Messiah being one prince, the Prince of Peace, Satan being the prince of darkness and the prince of the power of the air, and they're both involved in this text. We also see three mysteries of the Jews. Messiah will be cut off. The Jews missed it. You know, this is a text you use to witness to Jews. If you get a chance to witness to a Jew, you ask them what this text is talking about. Their Messiah being cut off. What does that mean? Well, he was crucified. Okay. Pretty obvious, right? The second is the destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish temple. Again, that took place in 70 AD. It's already been fulfilled. We believe it's a dual prophecy because it's going to be rebuilt. And then it's going to be desecrated again. Okay? Then we have the abomination of desolations here, which is really the fulfillment of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Satan literally sets up his Antichrist in the temple to be worshipped as God. And these three things are all part of the mystery. The Jews really didn't grab it. We understand it because we've got the revelation. We understand it because we've got 2 Thessalonians, and we've got scriptures that point to it. All they knew is something here is really mysterious because they had no concept really about what was going to go on with this nation and the temple being destroyed. Okay, so this was really mysterious to them. Now you need to understand 69 weeks plus 7 plus 2. And again, I point out maybe one Jubilee or 2 Jubilees. We really don't know. Okay. And that totals up to somewhere between 490 and 497 years. Now, we're going to learn next time we're together, or actually it starts with the decree, and turn to Nehemiah chapter 2. This is where the 70 weeks begins. And it's under the reign of King Artaxerxes. Beginning of verse 1 of chapter 2, it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. And I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing that thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very much afraid. Why would he be afraid here? He was the cupbearer. Why would the king be nervous when the cupbearer seems agitated or upset? That's right. The cupbearer was the one responsible for making sure the king's wine wasn't poisoned. And here's Nehemiah looking a little frazzled in front of the king, and the king's questioning him, right? You're not sick, what's going on? Verse 3, he said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchre, lies in waste, and its gates are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to God of heaven, and I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if the servant hath found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah unto the city of my father's sepulchre, that I may rebuild it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when shalt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I sent him a time. I set him a time. Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given to me to the governors beyond the river, that they may let me pass through till I come unto Judah. And the letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace which is near to the house, and for the walls of the city, and for the house that shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. And so Artaxerxes, in the 20th year of his reign, which happened to be 445 BC, authorized Nehemiah to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the city and rebuild the temple and the palaces. And he gave him letters of authority to get the lumber and everything he needed to do it. And he went back, and for 7 years they rebuilt the city and reestablished Jerusalem as a nation under King Artaxerxes. And that is what Daniel is referring to. Okay? It was actually written before, it was written about 750 BC, so it was written about 300 years before King Artaxerxes ever gave the decree to send Nehemiah back to Jerusalem. Okay? So we already had that prophecy fulfilled. That decree by Artaxerxes started the 70 years of Daniel, or 70 weeks of Daniel, 490 to 497 years. Okay, that started the time clock running. Okay, now if you do a calendar study, it takes you up to 69 weeks to Messiah being cut off. Now, he lived how long on the earth? 33 and a half years, right? So somewhere we think he was born somewhere between maybe 4 and 6 BC. And you add 33 and a half years to that. So let's just say 30 AD. Guess where 490 years puts you? Right in that time frame. Okay? Within 3 or 4 years at the most. Now, I'm not here to cross hairs. It happened exactly as God wanted it to happen, at the same time that it happened, exactly to fulfill these numbers. We're just not really sure what all the numbers are. Okay? Fullness of time Jesus came, so I guarantee fulfill the numbers, okay? But the reality is, Daniel told us 750 years before Christ ever came, Messiah was going to be cut off, and when? Okay? Now that leaves out 1 week of years. We've been in a period now of 2,000 years. In the New Testament, it's called the mystery of the gospel, the mystery of Christ, that doesn't exist in the Old Testament. Times of the Gentiles. Jews had no clue that God was going to deal with Gentiles until Peter went to Cornelius' house. You know? But the reality is, at some point, we're still missing a 7-year period from the Old Testament. And that is the 7 years, that's the Great Tribulation period, broken into 2 3.5-year periods for the sake of the Jews. Because remember, the 77 or 70 years were determined. Not 69. 70 years were determined to bring about the consummation. Remember, the theme of the book of Revelation is the consummation. So it's going to take another 7-year period to really deal with sin. Okay? And that's what the tribulation is about. Because God's got to deal with Satan first and foremost. Okay? So you got to understand that's what that 7-year period is about. That's why we know that the tribulation period is a specific 7-year period. And then we see it several times. We see it here. We're going to see it again in chapter 13, where God breaks it into 3.5 years and 3.5 years specifically. And he breaks it down to the number of days and the number of months. So he's real specific that this is a 7-year period. And it's the 70th week of Daniel. Okay? So that's how that all lays out. That's where we get the idea that the tribulation period is a 7-year period. Now, trust me, if you go back and you study some of the people of 100 years ago, they're all millennialists. There's a lot of people believe that the tribulation began in World War II, World War I, 1916. How does that fit to this? It doesn't. See? So trust me, a lot of this is new teaching. As the more we've understood about the Bible in the last 30, 40, 50 years, and people specifically studying prophecy and looking at it taking place before our eyes, we understand a lot of things that they didn't used to understand 100 years ago. But again, there are people, old-timers will tell you, well, we're in the tribulation. Really? Not from what I'm reading. We're still living in la-la land compared to what I read. Okay? But the reality is that I believe there's a 7-year period coming. You get it out of Daniel chapter 9. It's called the Great Tribulation Period. And Matthew 24 says that there's never been a time like it, and there's never going to be another one like it. It's going to be that bad. And that's the tribulation period. Does that help you on the 7 years? You now know where the 7 years come from, right? I'm done.